Julie Hartman live. It is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you, albeit 16 minutes late today. Please forgive us. We were filming an episode of Sean and Julie, which is, I guess, the new Dennis and Julie until Dennis comes back to us. And we got a little delayed. But, we'll ask for forgiveness later instead of permission beforehand. 844-861-5537 is the call-in number, 844-861-5537. And we've got a lot to talk about today. First, we hear often from conservatives that the proverbial they are taking away our guns. They are taking away our, what else do we complain that they're taking away? The kids. I don't know what. They're taking away the law and order. Another thing that the proverbial they are taking away from us is our meat. Yes, they are depriving the troops of the meat, people. Those people. I love it when conservatives refer to the proverbial they. But this is actually happening, and this is an identifiable they. The Pentagon, reading here from Just the News, is funding alternatives to meat protein, which includes using fungi for food for U.S. service members. Yes, that's right. There is a push to feed our service members meat alternatives instead of actual meat. Now, I am against this in totality. I am a huge carnivore myself. We need meat. We need protein. It says in the Bible, if you're Bible-based, that God gives us dominion over plants and animals. So as long as we treat them well in the butchering process, we can eat meat. But my gosh, if there's anybody who needs meat, it's our men and women in uniform. And we're going to give them some vegan crap or some, what is the other one? Vegetarian stuff. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, these people. Quote, the Department of Defense is focusing on investments into fungi protein as an alternative to animal protein after initially seeking to fund lab-grown meat earlier this year in an effort to reduce carbon emissions. Now, unsurprisingly, the program is part of President Joe Biden's Executive Order 14081, which is called Advancing Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Innovation for a Sustainable, Safe, and Secure American Bioeconomy. Whew! It's a mouthful. That sounds like the segment, Sean, do you remember, that you and I did called Theses or Feces?
Theses or feces. Yes, I love that one.
Yeah, we read aloud.
One of our best.
Yes, it was. The theses that won the prestigious awards at many universities, including $5,000. And it was like investigating the cross intersection of, one of them was male response or responses to stimuli in autistic male mice. And it's like, whoa, okay, I need a drink after hearing that one. Yeah, this executive order. It essentially is funding meat alternatives, which include fungi, to bolster the non-meat sector of the American economy, while also, they claim, helping the department achieve advanced defense capabilities. Yeah, making the troops vegan or vegetarian, definitely advancing our defense capabilities. Yeah, Sean.
Have these things even been proven to be healthy? Isn't there some kind of concern that, what's wrong with meat?
I agree. What is wrong with meat?
Also, if you're defending the country and you want to eat meat or smoke cigarettes or even drink,
totally,
you should be allowed to do so.
Absolutely. Now, to answer your question, there are some people who are saying that there are problems. A lot of these meat alternatives, they have some shady practices of how they're made that may not seem to facilitate the most healthful outcomes for the people who eat it. I just think this is like a masculinity issue. You cannot be serving the troops our fake meat, God knows what they're serving to them in China. They probably have like a live bat there that their troops in unison stab and eat all at once. And in Russia, they're probably having some, ancient fur animal that they're splicing and dicing and slinging over to the troops. But we in America, we're going to be feeding our troops some beans and tofu. Wow, we are strong. Yeah.
Rich in the chat brings up an interesting point that the military gets its food from the lowest bidder, and that ends up being grade D meat, is that really any worse?
Yeah, it's true. Hey, look, I'm not trying to shade vegetarians and vegans, even though for the past 3 minutes I was kind of shading vegetarians and vegans. I actually respect and admire you very much. It's something that I could never do. But come on. Do you see what I'm saying, that this is a masculinity issue? This is like, we can't be giving them tofu and lettuce.
Well, if that's what they want to eat, fine. But don't force people to not eat meat.
It's just not a good look. I'm just saying, it's just not a good look. Last week, this guy, Rep. Don Bacon, his name is Bacon.
You're joking.
No, literally look this up. Rep. Don Bacon, a Republican from Nebraska, who is a retired U.S. Air Force general, said last week, I proposed an amendment to cut all DOD funding for fake meat. Rep. Bacon posted on X in June.
I have a new favorite rep of all time, Rep. Bacon.
I know. Ready? He says, Nebraska is the beef state, leading in red meat production. Our farmers and ranchers can feed our military. We don't need this petri dish protein. The military needs to fund weapons, not fake meat. I mean, it's difficult to disagree with that. Of course, the Trump administration is going crazy over this. Hubbard, who is the who is the executive director of CEW, said that President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for defense secretary, that is Pete Hegseth, has, quote, taken aim at woke ideology that the Biden administration has forced on the DOD. This is just another example. He said America's enemies are laughing at us talking about fermented fungus burgers rather than natural farm-raised animal protein. This is part of a radical animal rights environmental worldview that claims that farmers are bad, destroying the planet, and the greatest thing is eating a hamburger, but the world is on fire, he said. Oh my gosh. Well, anyway. Hope you enjoyed that one. I look forward to, I can just picture Donald Trump signing an executive order, like, you know, not only stipulating that our troops have to eat meat, but it should be like medium rare. You know, it should be the highest level. We can't have our troops having well done meat or medium well. You know, I'm not going to say the word I'm thinking of, but that's weak. Can't be showing our enemies that. All right, in perhaps more consequential news. My gosh, there is a crazy story this morning coming out of Aurora, Colorado. Do we have the video for that? Not right now, but in just a few moments. Let me give the background. So the Aurora Police Department at 2:30 a.m. this morning responded to a call that there was an invasion at the Edge at Lowry apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. Later that day, 14 were arrested, this is reading from Breitbart, in conjunction with an armed home invasion of stabbing and kidnapping. Several armed suspects entered an apartment occupied by two people, the preliminary police report said. The suspects moved the victims to another apartment on the property where they were threatened and bound. Now, this is a terrible and newsworthy story in its own right, but what makes it all the more terrible and newsworthy is that it actually had already been happening for some time. The people who are allegedly responsible for these acts come from an illegal immigrant Venezuelan gang. The gang has been on the radar of the Aurora, Colorado apartment complex for some time because there was a viral video dating back to August showing men storming this complex in Aurora, Colorado, and allegedly demanding that residents vacate their apartments and turn over their rent money to those Venezuelan gang members instead of to their landlords. Here's the video from August.
The city nonprofits have lined up to help the migrants that have come here, but nobody is helping the American citizens, the residents that are trapped in these apartment complexes.
I love the background music they choose for these videos. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's the name. Tren de Aragua, I think, is the proper.
Tren de Aragua.
That's what I said. You just
Which sounds like
misheard
a boutique water
I
bar
know.
in
It doesn't
Santa
sound
Monica.
like... Totally.
Oh my God, what am I at Tren today? Aragua.
Totally. It sounds like a fun cocktail. No, but...
Apos.
So this is really just incredible because this story has been in our consciousness, as we know, since August, and very little happened between then and now. And then early this morning, we can see that it was escalated to a whole other level when 14 were arrested for, as I said, stabbing and kidnapping. Now, and sorry, Sean was speaking in my ear. Usually I can pass it off and do two things at once.
Well, now that I've interrupted you, I have two questions.
Okay, sure. Well,
The governor of Colorado has made Colorado a sanctuary state.
yes.
And this is what you get. And I also recall the media going nuts over Donald Trump saying they're bringing in criminals.
Yep.
They jumped all over him. But clearly, he was right.
Well, Sean, funny you should say that because that is exactly the point of this story. Donald Trump has been under fire, called a Nazi and a liar and a dictator and a eugenicist and God knows what else for claiming that there were people coming from other countries who were criminals, case in point. And also, this story exposed the mainstream media because back in August, when that video was released, the New York Times accused people of lying and exaggerating about this. Excuse me. Reading here from the New York Times. They said that, quote, the incident that you just saw on video was reported as a connection to gang violence, particularly the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, though documentation was scarce. So they're saying documentation was scarce. Then they went on to say that this story, that this gang was invading this apartment building and demanding that occupants vacate and give them money, was, quote, a false story fueled by real problems. Namely, reading here from Breitbart, that the apartments have descended into squalor and the city has been fighting to get them cleaned up. Now, here's the best part. The New York Times acknowledged that there may be, quote, criminal elements in the buildings, but denied that there was any widespread, again, reading here from Breitbart, gang activity. This was after 10 members from the gang in the area had been arrested for first-degree murder, assault, child abuse, and domestic abuse. So here we go again. I mean, example 500 of this happening. I can't even tell you, between sitting over there and guest hosting for Dennis in my show that I've done here for 2 years now, I have been in this situation so many times when something happens and we go back and go, look at how the mainstream media gaslit us that it wasn't happening. And look how Donald Trump was right all along. Hunter Biden laptop story is another example. The origins of COVID is another example. The efficacy of mask mandates, the censoring of conservatives online, namely on Twitter. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Good people on both sides.
That's right.
Bloodbath.
That's right.
It just goes on and on. I'm not for making predictions, but I believe Aurora is just the surface. We're just scratching the surface of this, that this is happening in other places, and we're not aware of it yet.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. It's amazing. I mean, the New York Times, I would love to ask them, how do you think this is going to end? Like, do you not think that you're going to be exposed? Maybe they genuinely had false reporting. Maybe they were operating on faulty information. I don't know. When stuff happens like this once or twice, you can understand it. But repeatedly, they have been wrong. They outright called the Hunter Biden laptop story Russian disinformation, for example. They outright called it a conspiracy theory that COVID came from a lab and not a bat. And then here we have it again with this story. They call it a false story. They say that there was scarce evidence, even though there was overwhelming evidence that a gang was occupying this apartment building. I mean, do they not think the chickens are going to come home to roost for them?
Yeah, and before anyone jumps on you for saying that you can't paint all immigrants with this broad brush,
of course.
We are not doing
even...
that. The vast majority of immigrants that come into this country are good people. But we need to protect the border, not sell off extra walls for pennies on the dollar. What's going on there? And we need to have a process so that we can keep this kind of element from taking root in America.
Absolutely. You know, Sean, I'm glad you brought it up, but I've sort of gotten to the point where I don't even do those, as I call them, Maoist self-criticism sessions anymore. It's ridiculous that if we're talking about an instance of illegal immigrants who are assaulting and kidnapping people, it would be taken to mean that I somehow think this is monolithic, that all illegal immigrants are characterized by this criminal activity. That's the left's worldview. You know, they take something that you say and then they pivot it to something that's totally different. So anyway, again, I'm glad you brought it up, but I have actually tried to not even go there because I don't even want to give that any kind of credence.
I hear you, but I do think it's important to do that.
Why?
Just so that they can't attack you for that reason.
Right. I hear you.
To lay it out there and go, hey, this is a rational thought from a rational mind, not from somebody who's trying to paint all immigrants as bad.
Of course, it's obscene. I mean, the great irony is I like most immigrants better than I like most Americans. I think that they're more grateful to be in this country, many of them. They understand what makes this country so great. I've said this before, that I would trade in a lot of Americans for a lot of illegal immigrants. Yeah.
There's a larger point here. It's important that conservatives get good at combating this in the public square. They don't make their case. They just let the left run with the narrative and the narrative and the narrative. And we've seen over time how wrong and dangerous it can be. Conservatives need to be eloquent and factual in their presentation and combat this nonsense, because I believe the majority of Americans like the truth.
I mean, amen. Amen to that. Well, moving on to another but related topic with regard to this citizenship issue. This one is really going to get the left up in arms. And truthfully, I don't quite know where I stand on this. I may be in agreement with the left on this. Donald Trump has indicated that his administration may want to end birthright citizenship. And this is something that is hotly contested, not just between the left and the right, but really within the right, if this is something that we should do. And it sounds very cruel and draconian kind of on the face. But once you go in and see why that may be something that is both legal and plausible, you at the very least have more understanding for this position. So birthright citizenship refers to just that, birthright citizenship. Doesn't matter who your parents are. If you are born on the soil of the United States of America, you are a United States citizen. Now, Trump has indicated that he may sign an executive order to end this practice, for the reason being that we have seen an explosion in illegal immigration, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this show. The levels of immigration coming into this, illegal immigration coming into this country over the past 4 years have surpassed many's wildest expectations. On a yearly basis, we've seen roughly 2 to 3 million illegal immigrants cross our southern border, overwhelming our education and healthcare infrastructure, as well as, seeing an explosion of people on the street. You understand what this has done. Now, also, we have seen what the Epoch Times calls an explosion in birth tourism. That is, people coming to the United States who are pregnant and then having their babies here in the United States to ensure that their children have citizenship. Now, let me just say here at the outset that I completely understand why anyone would want to do this. Hey, if I were an illegal immigrant, if I were living in a war-torn, poverty-stricken country where my child has no opportunity to have a good life, where we will be ruled by dictatorial, tyrannical, barbaric regimes, you bet I would come to the United States illegally and give birth to a child here. I have enormous sympathy for people who do that. But also, this is something that we just never can talk about. You can have sympathy for the reasons that people do something, and also need to realize that we have to maintain law and order and hold two truths, as people say at once. By the way, did you see that Wicked interview where the super woke interviewer was asking, I forget the actress's name, but it was Ariana Grande's co-star. She's like, have you seen on Viral that your singing Defying Gravity has allowed people to really hold space for that? And then the two actresses respond like, wow, that's so great. And Ariana Grande said later that she had no idea what that meant. Google Ariana Grande has no idea what holding space means. Google it. It was hilarious. But we can hold space for those two truths. Now let's dive in here, because this is actually fascinating from a legal perspective. The basis of our citizenship birthright citizenship, comes from the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment says, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And what many argue is that we have essentially defined citizenship according to the first part of that law and not the second part. We've looked at all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens, but those proponents say that we've gotten rid of the reference to and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which they say means that you have to be a citizen. You have to be here lawfully or have a visa here. You have to be essentially, actually, when I said you have to be a citizen was wrong. You have to be here lawfully. You have to have some kind of agreement with the federal government, again, most often in the case of a visa, to lawfully reside here. And that is actually how the Supreme Court has defined citizenship. We think that it has held to the fact that if you're just born here, it doesn't matter if your parents are here lawfully or unlawfully, then you're a citizen. But it actually has held that your parents must be here lawfully in order for you to be considered a citizen. For instance, in the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, that was a Supreme Court case dating back to 1897, and it concerned a Chinese child. The Supreme Court ruled that a child of a lawful permanent Chinese resident was a United States citizen. And so again, the important distinction here is that that is very different from being the child of illegal immigrants, to be the child of lawful immigrants, even if they have not fully gotten citizenship. So people are saying that we're not fully understanding or taking into account the full words of the 14th Amendment. Also, our court has this understanding of citizenship. And some proponents of this have gone even a step further to cite Section 4 of Article 4 of the Constitution. And that is the article that stipulates that the United States has an obligation to defend the 50 states, quote, against invasion. And so what people are arguing is that we have an invasion at our southern border. Even NPR did a poll where they asked, would you define what is going on at our southern border as an invasion? And most of the respondents said yes. And so some people are saying we have a constitutional obligation to protect our citizens against invasion, ending birthright citizenship, and thus ending the incentive for birth tourism would help counteract that threat. So as I indicated, I don't quite know where I stand on this. I'm quite conflicted because it's such a beautiful thing that people can be born here and enjoy the benefits of being an American citizen. I feel guilty that I just from the random luck of the universe happen to be born in the United States and be a citizen myself. And I understand that that is an immense privilege that I want to give to other people. However, I also understand how this is leading to incentives that have created this explosion in immigration. And I'll say this before I want to hear from Sean. We are so used to our United States way of looking at things that we would consider it. And even when I read this, my kind of American Pavlovian instinct was to consider this to be very cruel, to deny someone birthright citizenship. But then we forget that in the vast majority of places in the world, including Western countries, people don't enjoy that. In other countries, if you go and travel there and you give birth to a child there, they would think it's preposterous to say that that child is then a citizen. It's a largely American concept. So I just ask us to consider before we go, oh my God, that's so awful and that's so cruel. It really is kind of an aberration, a lovely one at that, but nevertheless an aberration in the scheme of the way that the world works. Sean, what do you think?
I have several thoughts.
Yes,
One,
go ahead.
The co-star in Wicked is Cynthia Erivo.
Oh, do you have that video?
No,
that's fine.
I'm just
that's
for
fine.
clarity's sake.
Thank you.
Number two, what are they saying Trump is proposing? That this is already happening. If someone comes over here, whether lawfully or not, and has a child, they are automatically an American citizen. That's already the way it is.
Yes.
And Trump wants to end that.
Yes. If you are the child of an illegal immigrant, not if you are a child of someone who has a visa. And that, because having a visa is different than being a citizen.
Right.
If you are lawfully in the United States and you have a child, then that child can be a citizen. If you are unlawfully in the United States and you have a child, your child should not be a citizen according to their proposal.
But that creates a very sticky wicket in the sense that if you have that child and that child is an American citizen, what do you do then? Deport the parents? You're breaking up families. Do you leave the baby here with no supervision? Does it become a ward of the
Well,
state?
that's what what they're saying is that getting rid of birthright citizenship would remediate that, because it would require you to deport both the parents and the child, because the child does not have citizenship if their parents are there unlawfully.
Okay, and my final thought is this. Rather than it being talking points and an issue to run on, we need some serious action taken to end this. There has to be a starting point somewhere, and I think some people are going to get hurt in the process.
Of course they are. It's a very...
Do you naturalize everyone that's already here and we start from there? I mean, these two sides need to come together and have some kind of solution for our country, because it can't keep going the way it is, tit for tat, and one person doing something and then the other administration undoing it. This doesn't solve anything. And nobody's blaming the immigrants. Obviously, you want to be a part of America. That makes total sense. But as a country, we have to protect ourselves from criminality. We also have to figure out how we are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants.
I know, it's a hard thing.
And this is the new wave of it. So if these kids are already legal, what do you do?
I know. And
you have to legalize their parents. There has to be a hard line somewhere, and then we have to move forward carrying out those laws.
And here's another thing. And my whole push in this story isn't to come down on, an affirmative opinion either way, because as I said, I'm really conflicted about this. Very, very conflicted. However, with so many things, what I endeavor to show is that it may not be as absurd or as callous as you think. And I know that there are so many people, especially my age, who would hear this and think it is the most callous thing in the world to deny birthright citizenship. And as I indicated, I'm pretty sympathetic to birthright citizenship as a recipient myself. We all are the beneficiaries of this. So I may lean more left on this issue than some of my conservative counterparts. But this is according to the Epoch Times, which is citing the the Federation for American Immigration Reform. American taxpayers spend $182 billion annually on illegal immigration. Now, we have to consider all sides here. And again, I'm not trying to come down on either side. I'm trying to show it's not as callous as we think. We have to protect ourselves. We have to protect our taxpayers. And it's not fair for people to be funding mass illegal immigration. It's just not. And also another thing is that as much sympathy as I have for this, and truly that's not a throwaway comment, immense sympathy for people, as I said, I would do it if I were not a citizen of this country. We have such an astounding amount of people in the world who desperately want to come to America. 50% of the world's immigrants flock to our shores. We have literally billions of people who are living under brutal authoritarian dictatorships. Sue Prager sent me this video, which likened immigration to the visual of gumballs. And every gumball represented 1 million people. And there was a jar that showed how many we could take. And then there were like 30 jars of how many people want to come here. And it's just that we have to have a more plausible solution to this, a more sustainable one. And it is really worth recognizing that before we call ourselves so callous, other countries don't even consider this at all. Again, it would be preposterous to go to most other countries and give birth and then expect your child to be a citizen. Yeah.
So to help with the callousness of this, and you invoked Sue Prager, our eminently wise friend Dennis Prager would make this distinction between the micro and the macro. It is perfectly acceptable, normal, and loving to have compassion in the micro for immigrants.
Of course.
But in the macro, it doesn't work.
Yep. It's hard. I mean, as a final note on this, and we could talk about this for so long, I feel guilty. coming down on the side of no on this, of wanting to repeal birthright citizenship. I feel guilty about that because I mean, what am I if not a beneficiary of birthright citizenship, you know? And so that's a hard thing to kind of grapple with. I mean, my parents were here lawfully, but also my parents weren't fleeing a horrible situation. So I guess this is just what we have to live with. I'll give another example, I guess, before we move on. In the spirit of full honesty, on this show, I had on a anti-surrogacy advocate, and I was born of a surrogate mother, and we went back and forth about it. And I kind of don't know where I stand on that issue now. I think even back when I was debating her, I was very pro-surrogacy. And now I would still say that I'm pro-surrogacy, but I'm a little hesitant because I've seen some of the things that can happen. And I think she raises good points about, especially outside of the United States, where surrogacy is used for child trafficking. Anyway, my point in bringing this up is I want us to normalize being conflicted. I want us to normalize also not feeling like because you are a certain thing, then it impels you to have a certain position. One of the things I realized in this whole surrogacy argument is that it actually is the very definition of freedom to be the child of a surrogate and oppose surrogacy. In other words, my identity doesn't compel me to think a certain way. And that's the problem we see with the left, where they go, well, if you're gay or you're black or you're this and you're that, then you have to vote this way. You have to think this way. And it is freedom to go, yeah, I'm gay, but I oppose the transing of the kids, or I'm this, that's really what it is. So anyway, I just thought that was worth saying, because so many of the way that we talk about these issues turns so personal, and it's like your personal identity has to inform where you stand. Of course, we all bring in our personal identities to this, but it's also fair to abandon that and think rationally.
That's why it's important to make the distinction between the micro and the macro.
Yes, great point.
And it brings a larger point, which is the brokenness of Washington.
Oh.
You are there as representatives to do our bidding, and the people want solutions, not hemorrhaging money and election slogans. You are there to do a job. It's your job to get along with the other side and find something bipartisan that works for the American people, period, full stop.
On that note, let's go on to talk about leprosy. But before we'll do that, God, this transition 0 out of 10. Let me tell you quickly about MyPillow. Right now, MyPillow is having a Christmas extravaganza. You can get something for everyone on your Christmas list. Get their famous My Slippers, regularly priced at $119.98, but now for a limited time, only $59.98. Get their 6-piece towel set for $29.98. And their flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. That's not all. Right now, MyPillow is extending their 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025, and all orders over $75 ship free. Go to MyPillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. Again, go to MyPillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman to get all of their great things on the Christmas extravaganza. Yes, Sean, I saw you wanted to cut in. Okay. All right. So today we're going to be quickly talking about one of these gospel series in our continuing gospel conversations for the month of December. We are doing 8 of 10 today. We have talked about that we want to do this to mainly increase biblical literacy and know about some of the wise and revolutionary parts of this great shared heritage we have as Americans. And today we can pull up a piece of art showing this event. We're going to be talking about when Jesus heals 10 men with leprosy. Now, as background, leprosy is and was a terrible disease involving skin rashes and scabbing and both internal and external wounding, and it's also highly contagious. And a person who had leprosy back in the time that Jesus lived was considered to be unclean. Not only in a medical sense, but also in a kind of personal sense. One can liken it to the way that many people who had HIV and AIDS were treated in the 80s as social pariahs, not just people who were afflicted by a medical infection, but were kind of morally inferior, if you will. And so because of the social stigma and, of course, the medical threat posed by leprosy, a person with leprosy who was, again, considered to be unclean, they couldn't go to temple and worship. They also lived in these leper colonies where fellow people who had leprosy would all be together in their quarantined, secluded area away from the rest of civilization. So to say that they were pariahs would be an understatement. And so leave it to Jesus to go straight to the pariah and interact with them. And at the risk of stating the obvious, although I don't think it is a risk because although it is obvious, we don't appreciate it enough at all. We can't imagine how revolutionary this was. Time and time again, and I've really gained an appreciation for this through this gospel series we've done for the past 8 episodes. In the Gospels, Jesus goes to the person who you would least expect him to go to. He goes to the Pharisees. He goes to the Samaritan woman. He goes to the woman who committed adultery, to the Gentile, and helps cast a demon out of the Gentile's child. Time and time again, he goes to the looked down upon, the downtrodden in society. And that was a way to burst through every conception of human relationships, which was to be tribal. And he went through that and made human relationships universal and said, you are created in the image and likeness of God. You have equal dignity in my eyes, as does anyone, regardless of your creed or color. And you are just as much a possible beneficiary of my grace and my salvation as any other person. And again, we today consider that to be totally normal. And it was not normal at all. In fact, it was deemed to be incredibly stupid and wayward to associate with someone who wasn't a part of your tribe or wasn't a part of your religion. Why would you ever subject yourself to that? Why would you ever associate with those inferior people? Or why would you put your clan at risk? And so we're all reaping the benefits now of this universal worldview. But at the time, we can't imagine how revolutionary it was. And as I say often, how revolutionary it continues to be. In most parts of the world, if you are a Sunni and you're interacting with a Shia, people look at you like you are insane, and even worse, may even try to kill you for interacting with a member of the opposing sectarian group. If you're a Kurd interacting with a Turk, or a Greek interacting with a Turk, or a Bengali and a Pakistani, a Taiwanese and a Chinese, a Hutu and a Tutsi, the list goes on and on and on, you are being insane by going against your tribe or your clan. So Jesus does that very thing, and he identifies those people and specifically heals and extends his grace to them to show time and time again this revolution that he was kickstarting. So reading here from the Gospels, and it's so short. Again, I always marvel at how short these stories are. So he goes to Jerusalem, and he's along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And remember, Samaria was where the Samaritans, the non-Jews, lived, and you never interacted with the Samaritans if you were a Jew. And he goes into a leper colony where 10 people had leprosy. And they stood at a distance and called out, "Jesus, have pity on us." When he saw them, it says, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And they went and they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back and praised God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And it says right here in the Gospels, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except you?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Now, there are some other versions of that story in the other Gospels. For instance, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus says to one of the healed lepers, "See that you don't tell this to anyone, But go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. So people point to that and show that, Jesus is still wanting to preserve some of the Old Testament laws. Also, of course, that he wanted to keep some of his healing and miracles concealed at this point so that the word wouldn't spread like wildfire, that the Son of God was in their midst, because that would promptly send the Roman authorities to be on his case. But the most important part of this story here, in addition to the fact that he is going straight for the downtrodden and for the outcasts, is that Jesus lays his hand on the lepers. He cleanses them, cleans them, and heals them by touching them. And think about it. If you're Jesus, you can snap your fingers, you can blink your eyes and heal any of these lepers. But he did that to, again, just show how personal he is and how loving he is, and that no one would be out of the reach of his grace and his care if they believed. And we can see here that the leper did believe. The leper said, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And then he was thanked once the lepers were cleansed. And I think that there's also a kind of visual there of the unclean or the sinful, if you will, the lepers being kind of allegory for sinful people, going and meeting with Jesus. And it reminds me of something that my dear friend, and it's crazy that I can even call him that, and a listener of this show, Dion DiMucci, the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, it reminds me of something that he said to me in his amazing Dion way. He has these Dionisms, as those of you who watched our interview together saw, and he has this thick Bronx accent, and he is a devout Catholic. And all of those make for such a fun recipe of spiritual wisdom delivered in only a Dion-esque way. And he said to me one time, he goes, Julie, the cross is such a beautiful thing. You can see I'm struggling with the Bronx accent. I can do the Irish accent very well, but a Bronx accent, not so much. I'll have to work on it. But he says, think about the cross. You go to the cross and you carry with you all your bullshit and your worries and your sins and your problems. And when you go up to that cross, he said, it's like a divine exchange where you're going with all your bullshit and you get back joy and mercy and grace and salvation. And I thought, whoa, that is truly an amazing visual and a miraculous phenomenon. That with Jesus and with the promise of Christianity, you can go and lay it at his feet. You can lay any of the, as Dion explicated colorfully, any of your problems. And he has this transformative reciprocal effect. And that, I think, is no better demonstrated through that visual of the leper being healed.
Just to be clear, Dion's talking about the crucifix, not just the cross, the crucifix.
Yes.
With Jesus on the cross.
Yeah, I don't know if it matters, but he's...
Oh, it matters.
Well, I know it matters with, Protestants don't display a crucifix, but I think what he means is the promise of Jesus, the cross, the crucifix, whatever you want to call it. So that's that. That is our great gospel story for today. Now, we have limited time, so we'll have to ask Sean if no, we don't have time. Okay. Well, we have something so funny to show you next week. You're going to get a kick out of it. But before I leave you, I want to tell you about something truly incredible. Salem is offering some of you lucky winners a VIP experience to attend the inauguration in Washington, D.C. This includes airfare for you and a guest to go to Washington, a 3-night stay in our nation's capital, and tickets to the inauguration. You should totally enter into this. It is an amazing historic opportunity. Go to Salem Podcast Network /Trump or go to SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump. What is the difference between those two? These ad reads. My God, I'm sorry. Whoever, it gets worse, Sean says. Oh, great. This is a trip for 2 to Washington, D.C., tickets to the Trump inauguration. You're right. It does get worse. I just said that. God, Okay, love these people, but really? Okay, you can enter by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to snc.tv or text Trump at 94878. That's probably the easiest. Text Trump to 94878. And despite the hassle that this may entail, it'll be worth it if you win tickets to that inauguration. So please do enter that and let me know if and when you win. Thanks so much for being here. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.